Good morning and afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait another couple of minutes and then we'll get started. For those of you who just joined us, we're just going to wait another minute, let a couple more people trickle in, and then we'll get started. All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Very excited about what we're going to be talking about today. Just a couple of items before. We're going to be recording this meeting as well. So we're going to be publishing that via our website afterwards. So if you want to go back, look at anything, or if you wanted to share it, we're going to get that out to you afterwards. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please submit them via Q&A, and we're going to collect them, and we're going to have some time at the end to go through that. And so with that, let's get into it. Let's talk a little about, what does this mean, advanced predictive planning for food and beverage clients, in combination with the Prevedere tool that we have available. My name is Christian Winsler. I'm a principal with RSM, and I lead our industry stack for food and beverage across 365 and then the broader Microsoft practice. Very excited about my two co-presenters that I have with me today. George Casey, he's also a principal with RSM, and he leads our advanced analytics practice. And then Danielle Marceau is from Prevedere. She's the director of analytics and pre-sale solutions. She's going to take us through a demo of the actual tool here later in the presentation. When we're looking at where we're at today, right, from a planning perspective, traditional planning solutions are typically based up on historical data. And we're looking at what happened, what sales do we have, what did the market do, and then human adjustments and interactions based up on that. And hopefully you see there's really two big flaws in that logic, right? One is historical data. We'll talk about a little bit more why that's a big issue. And then there's also, the human aspect of it. It is, what do we think things are going to do? That typically tribal knowledge, and they're not really faced in facts. And so as we move, as generations change, as consumer preferences change, that is going to become more and more important because, again, I might see something different and see something different happen than what's actually happening in the marketplace. So if we look at a few things that are actually playing into this, is, again, I mentioned historical data, right? We just had a pandemic. We're still dealing with some of the components of that. So historical data isn't really a good indicator of what is the future going to look like. If we take data from the last couple of years, it's going to be very difficult to predict what's going to happen here in the future. The economy is going to change, right? We're starting to see these trends. The air goes down, unfortunately. But again, if we look at the last few years, everything's been on the up and up. Everything's going great. Economy is growing. Well, if we're looking at that data, is that really going to help us to have a good look forward and see what are we going to do as we move along? Climate change is a big topic, right? Again, that is something that is changing over time, but how's that going to be looking like going forward? Are we going to have all the factors accounted for, and are we taking those data points into our calculations about what the future is going to look like? Global conflicts, there's always something going on around the world. Sometimes things escalate. I mean, again, we're all well aware of what's going on in Ukraine, the impact it has on Russia, fertilizers, the next type of plantings. I mean, all of those things are, again, if we look back in the last couple of years, not really anything to be considered, but now they are. So how do we take those data points back into what our model is going to look like going forward? And I mentioned it earlier, consumer preferences, right? They're ever changing. We've had a lot of people, staying at home, eating at home. That has changed in the last couple of years. Now we're going back. Restaurants are opening up. So how are those preferences changing, and how are they changing with the generational changes? And how do we factor that in to not just continue to do what we do? So, with that in mind is where we're going, right? Today, again, I said, legacy forecasting approach is traditionally based upon internal data. It's based upon historical APIs, and we're making some assumptions about external indicators. I'm going to turn it over to George right now, and he's going to tell us a little about what is the future going to look like. Where does a tool like Prevedere fit into that? And then we'll get into the demo.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. I appreciate that. And I think it's really an important starting, framework to think about historical data. And, we've been using historical data for years, and that's how we've been forecasting. And sometimes we do okay, and sometimes we don't. And when we don't, it's because things are different than they were last year, right? And so the idea of when everything's the same and I'm in stable economy, stable conditions, then, hey, this year will look a lot like last year. But more and more, we're seeing the impact when they're not the same. And we're in a position kind of from a technology, tool set, and data standpoint where we don't have to just subject ourselves to that it's okay to be wrong. And the idea that there are some signals in external data factors that are relevant and related to the data we're trying to predict. And so not only is it about things changing, but about things changing in advance and the relationship of those changes and predictors to the result we're trying to manage. That's where we're looking at some of these tools, and specifically Prevedere coming in, bringing in not just millions of external data sets, but the ability to understand them in context, and how do they affect, or how do the changes in those data affect the impact of our sales, or our forecasting supply, or value, whatever it may be. So I think that's what's so exciting in using the combination of these advanced AI-based modeling techniques with external data in context of our solution that we're seeing such exciting results from, and primarily, especially in this food and beverage context, where we see that a real dynamic market, right? A dynamic environment with all of the things you identified, Christian, around shifts in supply and demand, shifts in consumer preference, shifts in behavior. Are there signals to those shifts that we can predict and understand in advance to make to kind of create a better outcome? So really excited to introduce Danielle and have her talk us through the Prevedere solution and some of the success they've seen in food and beverage.
George. Thanks. So I'm going to be walking you through a demonstration of the Prevedere platform, but before we get there, I do want to talk a little bit about the planning process and how Prevedere can augment what you're doing today to give you a more holistic view. So at its core, what we do at Prevedere is we have a global intelligence cloud. This cloud is a data repository filled with millions of different global data time series from thousands of different data sources. We then have a proprietary correlation engine called Prevedere Discover that helps us to identify which of those millions of external factors are the most relevant and correlated to your business. We're then able to quantify the impact of these external factors through a predictive modeling engine, and then scenario plan and see what our likely business outcomes are in different economic scenarios and what this looks like for our categories. And then at the same time, we'll be monitoring all of this in real time to be able to proactively make business decisions ahead of your competition due to the changing external and economic climate. From a process perspective, this Global Intelligence Cloud and the platform can augment your existing forecasting and planning tools. So we are not meant to be a rip and replace of what you're currently doing. Our goal and our objective is to give you an external view of what we refer to as an unbiased economic baseline, and combine that with what you're doing today to come up with a consensus or holistic forecast or plan. So I'm going to actually jump into the software and walk you through these key steps and these key modules of the platform to show you how we can take this external data and turn it into predictive insights. So I'm going to quickly share my screen. So it's going to take a second here, I think, for it to pop up. Okay, so let's first start with Prevedere's Global Intelligence Cloud. As I mentioned before, this is a data warehouse of millions of different time series data sets. They are global. We are gathering data from pretty much so every country around the world. This data is validated, it is vetted, it is sitting here ready for use in predictive models. It is routinely updated every single night. Our data loaders, our little data bots, go out and hit our thousands of different data sources and check for any updated information. If there's been any new data points released, it automatically gets pulled into our Global Intelligence Cloud. So you can have confidence that any of the data that's seen here is routinely updated automatically, and it's ready for statistical modeling. Not only are we updating, maintaining the data, but we're also categorizing and tagging it to help make it a little bit easier for our users to find the information that they are looking for. So here you can see currently we have over 3 million data series. We have all different geographic types. So we've got all of the countries around the world. So for this example, let's just take a look at the United States. When we want to look at the data, we can look at different types of geographies. So what do I mean by that? Well, within the United States, we could be looking at national level. So really, maybe I just want to forecast my total US sales. Or maybe I'm more interested in a region or a state or an MSA because I know that my product or my category performs differently across the different regions. We do have more granular level data to support that more granular geographic region forecasting. But maybe we just want to take a look at United States national. And then we have all of the typical economic data and consumer confidence data that you read about in the news. You're going to see your unemployment, employment, GDP, labor force participation. We have all of that. But on top of that, we have very granular industry level data as well. So if we wanted to look, just very specifically at food, we can see there's still 10,816 food-related metrics for the United States sitting here ready to be used in predictive modeling. We also have very interesting consumer behavior and consumer preferences data broken out by different demographics. Maybe your category tailors towards children. Maybe your core purchaser is a mom or a caregiver. You may be interested in shifting consumer behavior for that particular demographic. So we could look for things like spending plan for moms on eating out, right? How much do they intend to eat at home versus going out to eat within that core demographic? We have a long data history of consistent time series data to see and understand how particularly moms pulled back on the plans to eat out during the pandemic, as with many others, bounced back very strong last summer. But we're seeing with the impact of inflation, eating away at disposable income, we're seeing that right now in the near term, moms' plans to eat out are not where they were heading into last summer, which could bode well for food and bev at home industry. So We have a very wide breadth of data, not just economic, but also a lot of this demographic and shifting consumer behavior, consistent time series updated on a routine basis that we can see how these trends are shifting and changing as we evolve from this pandemic. A couple other things about the data. As I mentioned before, it is routinely updated. Anytime you pull a data set out of the Prevedere software, you know that it is going to have the most recent and up-to-date information available. The other thing is you'll notice there is a long historical time series. We do not throw away old data. A lot of data providers, you get 5 years, you get 3 years. You can see this data goes all the way back to 2000. Some of the data might start in 2010, and we have some other data that goes all the way back to the 1950s. We make sure that we maintain a consistent historical time series whenever possible. So the data is great. We've got a lot of customers that utilize our data in their existing forecasting and planning processes. So there's many different ways to get our data out of the software. We can just export it into a CSV file. We have an open API where we can very easily push and pull this data and information into any of your existing forecasting or planning tools. We also are available on Snowflake and really many different avenues to get access to the data alone. However, I always like to say that the data is only as good as the insights that you can derive from it. So while we have millions of time series data series, we have filtering and tagging and categorizing to help you maybe find data that you're looking for. What's more powerful is that we have a patented correlation engine that actually uses machine learning to run millions of different correlations and calculations and actually direct you towards what external data series within our repository are the most relevant and correlated to your business. I actually would like to walk you through now an example of how we use machine learning and AI, marry it with this data to arrive at forward-looking predictive models for our customers. This is a customer example. This is simply their historical customer sales. This is a food and a CPG consumable goods company. This is high-level, national-level sales for their business. Think about this as whatever the time series is that you would be interested in forecasting or planning for. This could be sales or equivalized volume sales in United States for the frozen meals category or for the ice cream category. It could be Brazil, dollar sales of canned goods. Whatever the category is that you're interested in forecasting or planning for, cut by any sort of geographic region as well. To use our tool, we request at least 5 years of historical monthly or weekly time series data. Work very easily with the Nielsen, the IRI, the syndicated data sources, or your own sales or shipments. Again, 5 years minimum of historical time series data. So this is our customer example. What we will do is we will then take their historical sales data, we will run it through our Prevedere Discover engine. Prevedere Discover is that correlation engine, and what it's going to do is in a short period of time, it's going to run millions of different correlations between that historical sales data and all of the external data series we have in our data repositories. And we then get our results back, and I like to refer to it sort of as a smart search functionality at this point. We've got a lot of the same sort of search and filter features, but now the results are going to be returned to us with the strongest correlated variables at the top. So on the right-hand side here, you see a few key statistics. The top one is an R value, or a correlation coefficient. This is going to be anywhere between -1 and 1. The higher the absolute value, the stronger the correlation. This is a very strongly correlated metric. This tells me that this customer sales, out of all the data in Prevedere, the strongest correlated metric is to retail sales for general merchandise stores, and it has an R value of 0.97. The next key and very important statistic that we see here is a lead time. This is a 0-month leading indicator. Our engine not only finds correlation, but it also tests for leading and lagging relationships between historical sales performance and these external drivers. So while this is a very strongly correlated metric, it is a 0-month leading indicator. I'll show you in greater detail here in a little bit exactly what I mean by lead time. But what it actually means is, ideally, we're looking for leading indicators, something where an acceleration in that key metric results in acceleration in the business 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the line, so that we have some time to react to any major changes in trajectory that are likely to come down the path. So what Aaron discovered tells us the correlated variables, it tells us their lead time. We're then able to do similar search and filtering functionality, where maybe I could say I'm mostly interested in the food-related industry, show me the strongest correlated factors within food. And we can see things like consumption of fish and seafood or general retail sales. And the other key thing is that we're able to also filter on lead time. So I can tell it to only give me 3-month leading indicators or more. And we're able to then see what are the correlated leading factors of my business as I filter through these different geographies, industries, and the macroeconomic climate. So we are able to take all of this data and actually make it relevant to my business. So we'll spend some time going through and the engine helping us to identify what some key correlated external factors are. And then we take it to the next step in our process, which is our workbench. This is a very nice visualization tool where we're able to actually start to visualize the statistical relationship that the engine has identified. So on each one of these charts, the blue line is that customer historical sales data that I mentioned. The other color line on each one of these charts is a identified correlated external factor from our global intelligence cloud. You can see here for household estimates, so the total number of households in the United States, there's a strong correlation of 0.92. However, I mentioned the leading and lagging relationship. So I want to visually show you what this lead lag identification process looks like. What the engine is actually doing is we are taking this purple line, this household estimate, and we are pushing it forwards and backwards. And you can see how those statistics change in the bottom right-hand corner. I can actually see that while at a 0-month offset, there is a correlation of 0.92. But if I shift that purple line forward by 15 months, identified up here, that correlation increases to 0.96. This tells me that there's a stronger correlation at a 15-month offset, which means for this customer, when we start to see an acceleration in the total number of households in the United States, their business starts to feel an acceleration about 15 months later. If we monitor this indicator and we start to see a big slowdown or a decline in the number of households in the United States, this customer's sales or category is likely to feel that deceleration 15 months later. So our correlation engine has helped us to identify not just one, not just two, but many different correlated external factors from many different categories. Understanding things like earnings and income and wages and disposable income, including stimulus benefits, we're able to identify those statistical correlations and relationships, along with things like consumer spending plans for groceries, future plans, right? These are some future questions from some consumer surveys around what is the consumer's future intent over the next 90 days to spend on groceries. We can see very strongly correlated and some lead times here as well. Once we have this group of 20 to 40 highly correlated external drivers that may or may not be leading indicators, we then go into the next stage of the process, and that is to combine them together into a predictive model. We've got lots of indicators. We've got a dashboard. Dashboards are great, but the one thing that a dashboard doesn't do is it doesn't put it all together into one final answer. What does this mean? Some of these indicators are moving higher. Some of these indicators are moving lower. Ultimately, what does this mean for my business, my category during the next 6, 9, 12, 18 months? We use our proprietary Prevedere modeling engine that we call Prevedere Predict to accomplish taking these 20 to 40 indicators and determining what subset of them come together to make the most reliable, stable, and predictive model at forecasting my business. What our engine is it's a genetic algorithm that in a matter of minutes, it will take those 20 to 40 indicators, create thousands of different unique statistical models, run millions of different back-tested data points, and then score and rank each one of those thousands of models to tell us what group of variables come together to make the best predictive model for our business. So this example ran 1,337 unique models, many different back-tested data points within those unique models, and then ranked all 1,000 models with the #1 model at the top. It is ranked by Prevedere's model quality score, which is made up of 40 plus different statistical criteria around the consistency, reliability, stability, and forecast accuracy of each of these predictive models. So this tells me that these 5 variables identified through our correlation engine with varying offsets or lead times come together to make the best model. Looking at the top here, the solid blue line is the historical sales data. The dotted green line is the historical fit of this model. It's not a perfect model by any means. No model is perfect, but we can see that it is a very tight fit model. We also see the second scoring model or the third scoring model, and we can see how they are slightly different groups of external variables that come together. So once we decide on which of these high scoring, high quality predictive models we would like to deploy, we're then able to deploy a model. Once we deploy a model, that means that we now have a forward forecast. The solid blue line here is our historical sales data. The dotted line is what these external factors project for the business during the next 6, 9, 12, 18 months. We refer to this as the unbiased economic baseline. This is the direction that the external factors, the economic, demographic, consumer behavior metrics are going to be pushing your business or your category during the next 6, 9, 12 months. Again, this is kind of saying this is the headwinds or the tailwinds going to be presented to you from the external climate, what's going on outside of your 4 walls. We are able to see that for this customer, we're starting to see some headwinds, a slowdown in the rate of growth that they have been experiencing in 2021. And the other very key thing about our predictive models is that we can decompose them. we can actually understand why the forecast is going up or down. So if we're projecting 2.3% growth in June versus June of last year, we break it out by the different factors in the model and understand that the majority of that is coming from tailwinds by general merchandise retail sales, but there's some headwinds from hours worked from employees and some housing related metrics that then net out to be a positive 2.3% growth. It's interpretable predictive models. It's not black box modeling. As I mentioned, not black box modeling. We also provide all of the statistical criteria that any data scientists or analysts may be interested in when they're assessing the quality of a statistical model. And then most importantly, these models are live. These models are living, breathing forecast models. These are comprised of the external data in the Prevedere Global Intelligence Cloud that our system automatically and routinely updates. That means that every night when our data loaders go out and check for updated information, if there is any updated data points, it gets pulled into the Prevedere repository and pushed through these predictive models. That means that they are always taking into account the most recent and up-to-date information. They are always changing as the external and economic climate around us changes. At the same time, it's very important that if our models are going to be ever changing as the economic climate changes, we also need to be proactively monitoring the health and the statistical quality of these models. So as they are automatically being updated, they're also automatically being checked for the quality of the statistical model. This is what we call Prevedere Protect. As these data points actualize and are updated, it gets pushed through our Protect module, which assesses how the health of the model may deteriorate over time. So we can see that while this model is still of very high quality, it has deteriorated slightly. And then if it falls outside of the recommended bands, we actually proactively get an email alert. It says, hey, your model has fallen out of the statistical criteria that is set, and we need to go back and reevaluate the model. So there's no need to continuously assess the quality. That automatically happens as the external climate changes. Another very valuable piece of what we do here at Prevedere is once we've been able to identify what external factors are important to the business, quantify the impact of them, use them to predict the future, we then also are able to do some scenario planning around these external factors. So we are able to then kind of push through different potential macroeconomic climates. What would happen if maybe we have, right now we have, our team of economists has 3 macroeconomic scenarios. The baseline scenario, which is the one that's most probable at this point in time, very minimal economic growth through the remainder of this year as the economy continues to battle inflationary pressures. This is what my category is going to perform in that economic climate. But we know the risk of recession is higher now than it has been in a very long time. So we have another scenario, which is the recession scenario. This is what's likely to happen if the Fed is unable to curb inflation, or if they have to pull in the reins too tight too quickly, have a little bit of a misstep, and send the economy into an economic recession next year. This is what it would look like for my business. And then we have a third economic scenario where we're able to say, what if the Fed is able to miraculously navigate the economy through a soft landing, get inflation under control, and we're off to the races? This category is likely to perform up here. So once we've been able to identify the external factors, quantify their impact, we can then pressure test that with different scenarios around the external climate. to answer some of those key questions that you guys are probably being asked today within your organization. Well, what does this look like if we are to have a recession? Or what does it look like if we're not able to get inflation under control? We're able to push those scenarios through these different statistical models and to provide that range of potential outcomes given those unique scenarios. The last thing that I want to talk about here in the demonstration is how does this then get consumed? How does this get integrated into your existing process or tools? Well, we are a web-based software where you have the portal to go and you can see, as you see right here, that doesn't mean that you have to actually go log into Prevedere to get your model output. We can very easily push and pull this information into any of your existing forecasting or planning tools. So most often what we do is once we get the model set up, we set up a routine feed where on a monthly cadence, the output of these models gets pushed into your planning tool. We become another line item. We become that economic baseline in that sort of consensus forecast process that might be happening within your organization. We sort of become that one single source of truth around what's going on outside of your four walls and the external environment and what headwinds and tailwinds are likely to be presented to the business from that external climate. So in summary, I showed you our global intelligence cloud, the millions of different time series data sets we have from thousands of different data sources around the world to support forecasting, not just in the United States, but globally. How we marry that with your historical sales performance or category sales performance and use the Prevedere Discover engine to identify which of the external factors are the most relevant to your business. We visualize those, we're able to test out hypotheses and see lead lag relationships on the workbench. We then use the Prevedere Predict engine to very quickly create thousands of different models and arrive at the most reliable, stable, and predictive model for your business. And then we are able to use that model to then scenario plan and test for different potential scenarios in the future, as well as have Prevedere Protect to automatically monitor and assess the health and the quality of the model as it is automatically updated with the external environment as it changes around our business. So that's everything that I have from a demonstration perspective for you today, but I'm sure that you're probably asking, how does a customer adopt this? And what does this type of forecasting and planning look like? So we can talk through an actual customer use case within the food and bev industry at this point. Christian, if you want to pull the deck back up. Thank you. So here I want to walk you through how do we get started and how have we gotten started historically with some food and bev customers and some CPG customers from the past. So this was a very large CPG food manufacturing company. First, we wanted to assess the insights. We wanted to start small. So we identified 2 to 3 different lines of business, defined what the KPIs were. So in this example, we were doing total category sales for 3 of their categories. It was not just their brand sales, but we used the syndicated Nielsen data to understand the entire category. We decided to use equivalized volume as the dependent variable. And we chose 3 different countries because they're a multinational. So we did some work in the United Kingdom, United States, and Australia. So we defined 3 different categories across 3 different geographies. We ran these through the Prevedere engine, got the predictive models for the economic baseline. They shared throughout the organization. They started integrating it into their planning process for those different country category combinations. They were actually using us for the denominator of their market share projections. So that was one way. Prevedere brought the unbiased view of the category as a whole. Their brand managers, their category planners brought to the table what they thought their business was going to do, and the combination of the two became their share, that what they were expecting from a share perspective, because again, we had an unbiased single source of truth for what the entire category was going to be doing. They were able to integrate these forecasts into their planning process on a monthly basis. They gathered updated information out of Prevedere for their monthly planning process. They talked about the differences between the economic baseline and what they were thinking internally, and it started the conversation. It was really able to remove a lot of the I think it was gas prices. I think it was inflation. I think it was because moms weren't buying groceries, they were eating out. We quantified the impact of those things and removed those questions and are able to say, this is exactly what it was. This is what the key themes were. And then from there, after they were able to operationalize those category level forecasts, integrate them into their monthly cycle, we then expanded. We expanded different geographies, different lines of business. We got more granular. We started to do subcategories and then subcategories. And at this point, there are more than 50 different production models for many different lines of business in, I think, 13 different geographies around the world. And ultimately, they're getting the same level of insights where they're kind of removing that guesswork around what is going on outside of their 4 walls and impacting their category and their business. Right, so that's everything that I have for you today. Christian, I'll toss it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was great. Let me just see a couple of things that come in. Danielle, if we talk about what you showed and what you have up here as well, what this customer also for the audience, right? What type of tools or practices should they already have in place before they go onto this journey, right? We talked a little about traditional historical forecasting, where they can be. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as a very specific tool in place, there's really no requirement for a specific tool. Whatever you're currently using from a tool perspective, we are definitely able to integrate into the tool. I think what's important is that there is a monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, some sort of cadence of a forecasting and planning cycle already in place. Right, this is a little bit advanced in the maturity curve of a forecasting and planning process. So if you don't have one in place at all, we typically would need to make sure that we're getting that sort of a process implemented and started throughout the organization. But a very specific tool perspective is irrelevant. Whatever tool, if it's Excel, that's fine. If it is a more advanced planning tool, that's fine as well.
Excel, the most sophisticated ERP solution out there. So
absolutely,
that we'll see. Well, along those lines, though, right? You're talking a lot about what we're capturing outside. During the day when we saw some other data pieces, is what level of detail do you typically start at, and what type of data do you need to start getting into building these forecasts out, right? Versus just, hey, here's something. But like, where do you, when you have a project like this and you bring a client on, where do you typically start?
Yeah, we like to start high level. This type of analysis is not going to be for SKU level forecasting. We're not going to tell you, 8-ounce size of strawberry yogurt versus a 6-ounce size of vanilla yogurt. This is definitely higher level, think category, subcategory, maybe product grouping that are similar product groups. So we want to start high level, more a top down rather than a bottoms up forecasting approach. From the what type of data, we would need at least 5 years of historical time series data. That could be weekly or it can be monthly. Fiscal period, we know that then in the industry it's not monthly necessarily, but the fiscal period that aligns to the 4-week, 5-week, some sort of 5 years of historical time series data is really the requirement at that category level. And then ultimately we want to be looking at demand. So either equivalized volume, units, sales dollars. We have the most success with, as you all know, as industry experts, with volume because of the nuances of mix and package size, etc. And then dollars, we can forecast that as well, but we definitely need to make sure that we're taking into account pricing. So we'll also potentially need some pricing for the category as well.
Okay, good. I think we had a couple other questions that Jordan put out that came to him. We talked about the tools. I mean, that's kind of the first question. What about the, do I need to pay for or subscribe to the external data to be used in forecasting?
Yeah, so Prevedere, the data repository that we bring to the table, is a subscription-based platform. We are pulling data from a lot of different publicly available data sources. So that doesn't mean that you couldn't go and gather up some of this data yourself to try to incorporate into your planning. And we definitely encourage including external factors in any way possible. The problem is there's such a huge quantity of data available, right? So what's really powerful and really necessary is the engine that helps to tell you what of the external data is the most important. So the Prevedere platform is a subscription. There are ways to go gather this external data if you're pointed in the right direction to understand what data is most relevant to you.
Okay. And then, the last question we had on there is, how long does it typically take to get this forecast compiled with the external data? Obviously, we saw, right, there's an engine that runs, talk to us a little about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll talk about 2 different avenues of users of the Prevedere platform. So as a self-serve user, which would be a customer that subscribes to the platform, takes our training curriculum, and then is building the models themselves, using the analytics and the tools available, you can have a final predictive forecast, within a day. Like, it's a very short period of time. If you were to go out and gather all of this information on your own, you're talking a week just to gather all of the data and get it into one place to try to build this type of econometric model. So less than a day, within a day, you can have from nothing to a final predictive model for key categories. We also have software as a service where we have services tied to it, which you would leverage a partner such as RSM to utilize the platform for you. And in those situations, it might take a little bit longer, not because the analytics takes longer, but we want to make sure that we're driving the insights and delivering all of the insights derived from the platform to you. So that services side of it, it would take a little bit longer, only so that we could make sure that we're delivering in a very tied up, in a nice bow presentation, all of the analytics that could potentially be derived and all of the insights from this platform.
Okay. All right, so get one more thing coming up. We're looking at forecasting, right? So we talked about the challenge with historical data and obviously the impact of things like a pandemic can have. And we're hearing more again what's going to happen here in the future. So talk to us a little bit about, how far out. Obviously, we can do long range planning. We talked about that, right? But is also, if there's another major impact, how does that play into these models, and how does the model deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically, our core forecast horizon is 12 to 18 months out, where we're getting a 12 to 18 month forward-looking forecast. Ideally, we've been able to identify leading external drivers that can hopefully provide 6 to 9 months advanced lead time of a potential downturn in your business, in your industry. So when the economy enters into a recession, not every sector of the economy enters into a recession at the exact same time. Our objective is to identify the ones that enter in first that are leading of your business, especially food and bev. You guys are actually very well positioned in the economic business cycle because it's one of the last things consumers pull back on. Right? And when they do, they're really pulling back on only the major discretionary. So we can monitor the changing external climate around us and be able to say, hey, it's 6 months lead time between when people start actually switching, off of their discretionary food and bev spend, but they're going to switch off on many other things. Maybe it's something as big as an automobile purchase. 6 months ahead of time. So if we can monitor that lead time, we can be very proactive in identifying those major downturns. The other thing is that we have that scenario option, right? So we know everybody is able to forecast the next 18 months. We're not going to find an 18-month leading indicator, but we can pressure test these models and say, what if there is a recession 18 months from now? What does this look like for my business? Doesn't mean that we know there's going to be a recession, but then you know how to plan. If there's a probability of a recession, we know what that looks like for our business and we can plan adequately.
Yeah, and I think that what if scenario playing is obviously very valuable because a lot of companies don't do that today, and doing this data based up on the actual data points is going to help a lot. All right, I don't think we've got any other questions. With that, again, thank you again both to my co-presenters, George and Danielle. Fantastic walkthrough here. To the audience, we recorded this, we'll share this with you. And if you have any questions after this, you can have our contacts, feel free to reach out. So with that, thank you everyone. And that concludes our webinar today.
Thank you.